In this video, I will like to discuss how to conduct a deconstructive reading of a text. How will you apply a deconstructive reading process in a literary text? In Peter Barry's beginning theory, he identifies three stages of deconstructive process. While reading a literary text, it can go through. We will have to make go through certain processes, and there are three stages. One is the verbal reading of the text. The other is the textual unraveling. And third one is linguistics. By verbal, what Peter Barry says is the process involves looking for paradoxes and contradictions in the text. And also, it can also include the tendency to unravel binary oppositions and to reverse it. In the textual stage, the deconstructist will be looking for shifts or breaks in the continuity of the poem. It can be a shift in focus, a time, or tone, point of view, attitude, pace, vocabulary race, etc. And in the linguistic stage, the critic will be looking for moments in the text when the adequacy of language itself as a medium of communication is called into question. So let us see the three stages, three processes by looking at a typical example, which is also given in Peter Barry's beginning theory, the poem by Dylan Thomas, a refusal to mourn the death by fire of a child in London. The entire poem is about the death of a child in London by fire, and the title itself says a refusal to mourn the death by fire of a child in London. So you can see the poem here. Never until the mankind making, bird, beast, and flower, fathering and o'er humbling darkness, tells to the silence the last light breaking, and the still hour is come of the sea tumbling in harness, and I must enter again the round Zion of the waterbed, and the synagogue of the ear of corn shall I let pray the shadows of sound, or sow my sound seed in the least valley of sackcloth, to mourn the majesty and burning of the child's death. I shall not murder the mankind of going with a great truth, nor blaspheme down the stations of the breath, with any further elegy of innocence and youth. Deep with the first dead lies London's daughter, robed in the long fronts, the grains beyond age, the dark veins of a mother, secret by the unmourning water of the riding Thames. After the first death, there is no other. So this is the poem. So how we will go through the three stages of deconstructive reading in the text. The first stage, the verbal stage, it may be similar to the close reading strategy of the new critics, looking for paradoxes and contradictions. For example, in the poem, the final line of the poems, Dylan Thomas says, after the first death, there is no other. After the first death, there is no other. This statement contradicts and refutes itself. If something is called the first, it automatically means there is a second. It follows a second or third and fourth. So the phrase the first death clearly implies there will be others. So internal contradictions of these kind will be one way to unravel the meaning of the text. Again, the entire poem is built upon a binary opposite. Like we have binary opposites, male and female, day and night, light and dark. So normally in such binary opposites, one term will be privileged, or we call it violent hierarchy. One is dominating over the other. However, in this poem, it seems to be the darkness. You know, the humbling darkness tells with silence the last light breaking. So here, it seems to be darkness rather than light, which is seen as engendering life, as the poet talks of the mankind making bird, beast, and flower, fathering and all, humbling darkness. So this paradox reflects the way the world of this poem is simultaneously a recognizable version of the world we live in and an inversion of that world. So unraveling or identifying such binary opposites in the poem, contradictions and paradoxical elements, it can be one way of the verbal analysis. The next stage in the deconstructive process is the textual one. At this stage, the critic is looking for shift or breaks in the continuity of the poem. So, here in the case of the poem, A Refusal to Mourn, there are major time shifts and changes in viewpoint, not a smooth chronological progression. So, the last light breaks, the sea finally becomes still. The cycle which produces bird, beast, and flower comes to an end, as all humbling darkness descends. So this is the uh, passing of geological time is in the first stanza we can see this. But the third stanza is centered on the present, the actual death of the child is uh, here mentioned in the poem. The majesty and burning of the child's death. The final stanza takes a broad vista like the first two, but it seems to center on the historical progression of the recorded history of London, as witnessed by the unmourning water of the riding Thames. So this is the way in which the time shift in the poem. In the linguistic stage, that is the last stage of the deconstructive reading process, here it involves looking for moments in the poem when the adequacy of language itself as a medium of communication is called into question. Such moments occur when, for example, there is implicit or explicit reference to the unreliability or untrustworthiness of the language. So here we come to the real deconstructive process. A deconstructive reading, it may involve, for instance, saying that something is unsayable or saying that it is impossible to utter or describe something and then doing so. Here, the entire poem is centered on that. If you look at the title, a refusal to mourn the death. So the poet says that I refuse to mourn the death. Again, he says that I shall not murder the mankind of her going with the grave truth, nor blaspheme down the stations of the breath with any further elegy of innocence and youth. So I will not write such an elegy. The whole poem says what it says it won't do. The speaker professes his refusal to mourn. However, the poem itself constitutes an act of mourning. The poet says that it is a refusal to mourn, but the entire poem is actually mourning the death of the child. So this again follows uh, deep with the first dead lies London's daughter. The speaker proclaims, which sounds very like a traditional patriarchal oratory, with the dead person transformed into something larger than life heroic figure, becoming London's daughter, robbed as for some great procession of the dead of all the ages, and now reunited with Mother Earth in the form of the London clay in which she is now buried. So in this poem, or you might say, Thomas identifies the language trap and then falls into it. Okay, so he may be trying to criticize the entire nature of the elegiac poetry in which such expressions are being used, and I will not use such cliches. That may be the intention of the author, but by proclaiming the entire thing, he actually professing what he says he won't do. So this is the way we will be typically reading text using a deconstructive strategy. So kindly undoing the text, maybe that can be the way in which we can analyze a text by applying a deconstructive reading process. Thank you.